Welcome to the basics video, where I will go over the basics of the phone that the average person will care about. This video is for the Nexus 6. Feel free to check out my specs video for a more detailed explanation of this phone. This Motorola made Nexus 6 has a 13 megapixel back camera along with a 2 megapixel front camera. Overall, the pictures are good. They aren't as bright or as saturated as some newer Samsung and Apple phones, but you can still take some awesome photos with this camera. Even at night, the performance is alright. Lack of 60 frames per second video kind of sucks, but at the same time, this phone does have 4K recording, which was pretty cool back in 2014. There are a few features or gimmicks in this camera, but that's the idea. It's supposed to be just a camera. Still, I would say that the sensor isn't terrible, but by today's standard, the camera is decent. The camera does have optical image stabilization, which is something that the Nexus 6 had, but the Nexus 5X and the Nexus 6P, along with the first generation Pixels, did not have that. I found this especially weird because the Pixel was said to be the best camera of its time. Overall, I would say that these cameras get a 6.25 out of 10. The phone runs stock Android 7.1.1 Nougat and has not been updated to Android Oreo. This kind of sucks, but there are alternative options for putting software like that on your phone, with Android Pie being an option as well. This is what makes Nexus devices so special. With the Nexus 6, it's pure Android, which is nice, but that means that it's not exactly the same as the Pixel devices. The app launcher still has a button you have to click rather than swiping up. There isn't the always on display, but there is an ambient display. Double tap to wake is not available on this phone by default, but the ambient display helps remedy this disappointment. I mean, really, the phone is pretty similar to the Nexus 6P, software-wise. It has all the basics and skips all the gimmicks. In a way, this makes this phone refreshing, and is probably why this phone is still capable of working without going super slow. If you know what stock Android is, then there's really nothing to talk about. Also, this has been in the phone for a while, but no one talks about the fact that this phone has face detection. Yes, this phone has Face ID, just like the iPhone. Okay, it's not the same, and it's really easy to bypass if you have a decent picture of the owner, but the point is that this phone does have it, and it actually works pretty quick. Even the Galaxy Nexus had this feature, and that was back in 2011. For me, the software is solid and fast, but it isn't the newest anymore, so it gets a 7.5 out of 10. As for the battery, it's exactly what you would expect from a 4-year-old phone. This phone has a 3220 mAh cell, which is pretty big, but it isn't entirely the best. With that said, I didn't experience any random reboots because of the battery, like another Nexus phone I know. After 14 hours and 45 minutes of usage, my phone was left with 42%, and 1 hour and 54 minutes of that was screen on time. Another day I got 14 hours and 42 minutes of usage with 36% remaining, and 2 hours and 6 minutes of that was screen on time. Another day I got 14 hours and 28 minutes of usage out of this battery with 13% remaining, and 2 hours and 48 minutes of that was screen on time. All of these figures are with the brightness all the way up. The stats sound decent, and they are. The battery should be replaced at some point, but I still feel like the battery has held up pretty well. This is probably due to the size of the cell and because the screen is an AMOLED display. But in the past, I've noticed that AMOLED screens generally drain just as bad as LCD ones. Overall, the battery category receives an 8 out of 10. It's odd comparing this phone to the Nexus 5 because it was made by LG and at a way different price point, but let's see what changed. The phone is dramatically different, moving from a 5-inch screen on the Nexus 5 to a 6-inch screen on the Nexus 6, hence the name. The screen also moved from a 1080p LCD screen to a 1440p AMOLED screen, which I feel like was an amazing choice. As for the size of the phone, it's pretty obvious that the phone is not only wider, but also taller. Surprisingly, the Nexus 6 is slightly thicker, even though it overall looks thinner than the Nexus 5. Another thing is that the Nexus 6 is made out of metal on the sides and plastic on the back, while the Nexus 5 is all plastic. Not only are there 2 speakers on the Nexus 6, but there are also front-facing speakers as well. The front camera has moved to the right side of the phone and has been bumped up from a 1.3 megapixel sensor to a 2 megapixel sensor, but that's not a huge increase in quality. The microphone placement has been moved, along with the addition of 2 more on this phone. The SIM card tray not only has been moved from a micro SIM to a nano SIM tray, but it also has been moved to the top of the phone right next to the headset jack. The volume buttons are now on the right side along with the textured power button. On the bottom you'll see the reverse micro USB plug still there, but it isn't off center like the Nexus 5. The back camera has been centered and is bumped up to a 13 megapixel sensor from a 8 megapixel sensor in the Nexus 5. There is also 2 LEDs for the flash and a ring style rather than a single one. The Nexus logo is still here and slightly larger. This was a huge deal back in the day. The processor, GPU, and RAM got a nice upgrade, moving from the Snapdragon 800 processor to the Snapdragon 805 processor, along with 2GB to 3GB of RAM. The battery size increased by a massive 920 milliamps. One phone is way larger than the other, but still, it's a nice upgrade. Lastly, there are minor additions like Bluetooth 4.1, Quick Charge 2.0, 4K recording, and 32GB of built-in memory standard. Overall, I would say that it's pretty obvious that this is a major upgrade, so the category gets an 8 out of 10. I would love to see a big upgrade like this happen in a 2019 flagship phone. Now this phone has been out for a while and the parts have dropped in price, but the screen is still pretty expensive. The screen does break pretty easily when dropped and will cost you about $90 to fix it yourself or $160 for a third party to do it for you. The camera lens is sunken in, and I guess it could break, even though a basic Google search shows that it is the Nexus 6P that's cracking, not the Nexus 6. The funny thing is, literally searching Nexus 6 camera lenses on eBay comes up with a bunch of Nexus 6P lenses, but you can replace your Nexus 6 camera lens for about $9 with a used one, or it'll cost you about $45 or so for a third party to do it for you. The backs are easy to replace and will cost about $8 to do it yourself, or $25 to $35 for a third party to do it for you. The charging port can be replaced for $4 if you know how to solder, but I wouldn't recommend doing it because it's right next to some crucial components. A third party will probably charge you somewhere around $65 to $100 to replace this port for you. If you break it, I would say just stick to wireless charging. The battery would need to be replaced at some point and will run you about $10 for an OEM one, but know that they're probably never going to look exactly the same as the one that's in your phone. A third party will probably charge you around $65 to $85 to replace the battery for you. I doubt Google or Motorola will help you out with any of these issues that you have with your phone, so you might be on your own if you do break it. With all this said, the phone seems pretty durable, minus the screen. Given the prices and repairability, I would say that the Nexus 6 gets a 7.75 out of 10 for durability and repair cost. Now, should you buy this phone? With a score of 75%, I believe that you should still consider this phone. Sure, it's getting old, but it's still an amazing phone as long as you don't require any graphic-intensive gameplay. The battery is good, along with the screen and the operating system. This was the best of its class back in 2014, and 4 years later, it still works fine. I miss those days. Buying a phone was so much simpler. Yes, I just reviewed a 4-year-old phone, but this is one of the best phones that I've ever owned. I hope you learned something from these videos, but now I want to learn something from you. Would you rather have an old flagship phone or a new mid-range phone with similar specs? Let me know in the comment section or on Twitter at MattofRWR. And feel free to follow me on the social media listed above. Also, subscribe to my channel if you want more videos like this. And if you really like these videos, hit that bell button. Thanks for watching.